The Novi V8 is remembered as one of the most powerful yet ill-fated engines in American motorsports. It was the fastest machine that never tasted victory, the loudest roar at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway that eventually fell into silence. From the very beginning, it seemed cursed, sabotaged not by design flaws alone, but by the circumstances that surrounded its creation. For 2 decades, the Novi represented both brilliance and heartbreak, an engine capable of producing a sound like no other in racing history. Yet, despite its incredible horsepower, it never won a single Indianapolis 500. This is the story of how such a marvel came to life, the minds that built it, the technology that pushed it forward, and the problems that ultimately destroyed its chances. To understand the legend of the Novi, we have to step back into the 1920s, a golden yet chaotic decade for motorsports. The Indianapolis 500 wasn't just a race, it was an experimental stage where mechanics and engineers tested radical ideas. Cars weren't mass-produced machines, they were hand-built creations, crafted one bolt at a time by men whose fingers were stained with grease, but whose minds were sharp with innovation. By 1929, these machines had become wilder than ever. America was booming with prosperity, and the cars reflected that excess. Custom engines, exotic materials, and staggering costs had transformed Indy into a showcase for millionaires. But not everyone was thrilled. Eddie Rickenbacker, a decorated World War I flying ace who had become owner of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, feared the race was straying from its true purpose. Factory automakers were pulling out, unable to compete with the custom-built monsters that bore no resemblance to production cars. So, to Rickenbacker, this was dangerous. Indy was supposed to drive innovation that could eventually benefit everyday automobiles. So, in 1930, he announced radical rule changes. Engines could be no larger than 366 cubic inches, 6 liters, superchargers were banned unless used with 2-stroke engines, and cars had to meet a new minimum weight requirement of 1,750 pounds. The elite car builders were furious. They mocked these regulations as the junk formula, predicting a future where the race would be filled with garage-built wrecks instead of finely tuned racing machines. Yet Rickenbacker's vision proved prophetic. When the Great Depression struck later that same year, money dried up across the nation, and the so-called junk formula became a savior. Smaller teams could now afford to compete, and major names like Studebaker and Buick returned, drawn by rules that encouraged creativity over extravagance. Even under these new conditions, one man still stood above all others: Harry Miller. Miller was the undisputed genius of American race engineering, an inventor whose engines were both beautiful and blisteringly fast. His creations ranged from inline 4s to V12s, some turbocharged experiments, and almost all were winners at Indy. But Miller's brilliance in the workshop was offset by his disastrous financial management. By the early 1930s, after years of debt and bad business deals, he went bankrupt. This is where Preston Tucker entered the story. Tucker, often described as both a visionary and a con man, convinced Miller to partner with him on an audacious idea: build a fleet of revolutionary front-wheel drive race cars powered by Ford's flathead V8 and take the 1935 Indianapolis 500 by storm. Tucker pitched the plan to Henry and Edsel Ford as a chance to showcase Ford's humble flathead as a racing powerhouse. Astonishingly, the Fords agreed. The plan quickly spiraled into chaos. Tucker and Miller promised to build 10 entirely new cars for only $25,000, with just 5 months until the race. Engineers worked frantically, designing front-wheel drive layouts, new suspensions, and sleek aerodynamic bodies. On the surface, the cars looked futuristic, but inside they were rushed, untested, and plagued with design flaws. The most dangerous issue came from Ford's compact epicyclic steering box, which was mounted too close to the exhaust. During the race, the heat burned away its grease, causing the steering to seize without warning. Experienced drivers refused to risk their lives in the cars, leaving only rookies and desperate veterans to take the wheel. Out of the 10 cars, only 5 qualified, and none finished the race. Every single one fell victim to catastrophic mechanical failure. Henry Ford was humiliated. Furious at the public embarrassment, he locked the cars away, swore never to speak of them again, and effectively buried the project. But not everyone was willing to let the failure die. In 1937, Lewis Welch, a Detroit industrialist and owner of the Novi Equipment Company, bought two of the abandoned Miller Ford cars. Welch, who held over a dozen patents and had a deep passion for the Indianapolis 500, believed they could still be competitive. He replaced the unreliable Ford flatheads with Offenhausers, then the gold standard of American racing. The result was promising, a third-place finish in 1939. Still, Welch wasn't satisfied. He wanted dominance, not respectability. In 1938, new rules allowed supercharged 3-liter engines, and Welch saw an opportunity others ignored. He assembled a dream team: Louis Mayer, Indy's first 3-time winner; Leo Gosen, Miller's brilliant engineer; carburetor specialist Bud Winfield; and Fred Offenhauser himself. Their mission was simple: build the most powerful racing engine Indy had ever seen. The result was the Novi V8. Designed by Gosen and refined by Winfield, it was a masterpiece of engineering. Its centrifugal supercharger spun at an astonishing 55,000 RPM, producing nearly 450 horsepower at a time when competitors struggled to reach 300. It was a technological marvel, and its sound became legendary, a high-pitched shriek unlike anything else at the Speedway. Fans called it the howl of the Novi. But the Novi had one fatal flaw. Its power was caged in outdated front-wheel drive chassis originally derived from the failed Ford project. The immense torque shredded tires and snapped axles. Drivers wrestled the car like a wild beast. Ralph Hepburn, one of the veterans tasked with taming it, famously jammed a block of wood under the throttle just to keep the drivetrain from destroying itself. Even with all these issues, he managed a remarkable 4th-place finish in the Novi's first 1941 debut. The engine was raw, violent, and uncontrollable, but also thrilling. When World War II halted the Indianapolis 500 between 1942 and 1945, the Novi went silent along with the Speedway. But in 1946, it returned, faster and more dangerous than ever. With a newly designed front-wheel drive chassis by Leo Gosen, the Novi shattered the qualifying record at 134.449 miles per hour. Yet its weakness remained. The immense power overwhelmed the car's tires and handling. Drivers described it as a death trap, capable of blistering speed, but nearly impossible to control in corners. The Novi had become both a fan favorite and a feared machine, winning admiration in the stands, but leaving broken dreams and broken cars on the track. By the late 1940s, the Novi had already developed a reputation as both thrilling and terrifying. In 1948, tragedy struck when veteran driver Ralph Hepburn, the man who had coaxed the car to a remarkable 4th-place finish in its debut years earlier, was killed in a violent practice crash at Indianapolis. Just a year later, in 1949, Duke Nalon started on pole position and led the field, only to be engulfed in a fiery wreck that nearly cost him his life. He miraculously survived, but the crash reinforced the Novi's ominous reputation. By now, the Novi wasn't just a racing machine. It had become a symbol, a mechanical monster admired by fans, but dreaded by drivers. Its shrieking supercharger was so loud, it drowned out every other engine on the track. And yet behind the spectacle, it carried a grim truth. The Novi almost never finished what it started. Tires shredded under its power, axles snapped under strain, and every engineering tweak seemed unable to tame the beast. By 1951, the Novi V8 was producing a staggering 550 horsepower, nearly double what most rival engines could muster. And still, heartbreak followed. In 1953, veteran driver Chet Miller was killed during practice, another name added to the list of drivers who paid the ultimate price in pursuit of the Novi dream. To many, the engine was cursed. Lewis Welch, however, refused to give up. After years of persisting with front-wheel drive chassis, he finally allowed a shift. By 1956, the Novi was installed in a rear-wheel drive Curtiss chassis, a design far better suited to managing its explosive power. Paul Russo qualified 8th that year, and even briefly led the race before a blown tire ended his hopes. In 1957, Russo returned with renewed determination, setting a pole record of 144.817 miles per hour, a moment that sent the Indianapolis crowd into a frenzy. But once again, mechanical troubles intervened, and though Russo finished fourth, the elusive victory still slipped away. In 1958, the Novi traveled overseas for the Race of Two Worlds at Monza in Italy. There, it showcased its raw speed like never before, hitting 177.046 miles per hour on the high-banked oval, a world record at the time. But as had become tradition, both Novi-powered cars broke down before the finish. The engine had proven it was fast enough to dominate the world, but still not durable enough to win. By 1960, Louis Welch had poured his money, energy, and passion into the Novi for more than 20 years, but the dream had cost him dearly, and still no victory had come. Exhausted, Welch decided to sell. That's when Andy Granitelli stepped in. Granitelli was larger than life, a flamboyant promoter, the face of STP oil additives, and a man who thrived on showmanship. To him, the Novi wasn't a curse, but a challenge waiting to be conquered. He bought the entire Novi program for just $10,000, determined to do what no one else could, turn it into a winner. Under Granitelli's leadership, the Novi underwent another transformation. He pushed its horsepower beyond 750, trimmed its weight to just over 500 pounds, and commissioned modern chassis designs to give the monster a fighting chance. In 1963, Granitelli fielded 3 Novi-powered cars at Indianapolis. Hopes were high, but once again, mechanical failures, crashes, and bad luck destroyed the effort. But still, Granitelli wasn't ready to quit. Inspired by the advice of racing legend Sterling Moss, he decided to experiment with four-wheel drive, believing it might finally tame the Novi's overwhelming torque. For 1964, Granitelli unveiled a Ferguson four-wheel drive chassis powered by an astonishing 837 horsepower Novi V8. On paper, it looked unbeatable. But tragedy struck again. Rookie driver Eddie Sachs, I'm going to make a correction to that. In reality, Dave McDonald and Eddie Sachs perished in 1964's fiery start crash, but it did not directly involve a Novi. The association with tragedy only deepened the belief in a Novi curse. In 1965, Granitelli doubled down, creating his own four-wheel drive chassis tailored specifically for the Novi. But no matter how much innovation went into the project, the results were the same: blistering qualifying runs followed by disappointment on race day. By 1966, only a single Novi was entered, and it crashed in qualifying. After more than 2 decades of evolution, the Novi story ended not with a victory, but with a final wreck. The Novi didn't fail because it lacked power. If anything, it failed because it had too much. For nearly 25 years, it was the most powerful engine at Indianapolis, often making 200 horsepower more than its nearest rivals. Its screaming centrifugal supercharger created an unforgettable sound, a shriek that echoed through the grandstands like nothing else. Fans loved it, drivers respected it, but engineers struggled to control it. The real problem wasn't the engine, it was everything around it. For too long, the Novi was shackled to flawed or outdated chassis designs, starting with the compromised Miller-Ford layouts of the 1930s. Front-wheel drive was an experiment that never truly worked at Indy, and yet pride and tradition kept the Novi chained to it far longer than it should have been. Even when rear-wheel drive chassis were finally introduced in the 1950s, tire and suspension technology simply couldn't withstand the Novi's brutal torque. The cars would spin their wheels uncontrollably, shred rubber, or snap suspensions mid-race. Another key issue was development. While rival engines like the Offenheiser gained reliability and refinement through constant racing in sprints, midgets, and dirt cars across America, the Novi was essentially a one-race-per-year project. Its entire development cycle lived and died at Indianapolis. With so few chances to test and evolve, the engine remained raw, powerful, but perpetually flawed. Drivers who attempted to master it often described it as nearly uncontrollable. The centrifugal supercharger delivered power high in the rev range, making the car sluggish out of corners before unleashing a violent surge of speed. This unpredictability destroyed tires, punished drivetrains, and terrified drivers. Some, like Ralph Hepburn, once jammed a block of wood under the throttle just to keep the transmission from tearing itself apart. The Novi's reputation for danger was also amplified by the brutal realities of mid-20th century racing. Fatal accidents were tragically common across all teams, and safety standards were minimal compared to today. Leather helmets, thin fire suits, and slow medical response meant every crash could be deadly. The Novi stood out not because it was inherently more dangerous than other cars, but because its unmatched power magnified every other weakness in the machines and the era. About 10 Novi engines were ever built, yet their legacy remains larger than life. The Novi never won the Indianapolis 500. It never even came close to matching the reliability of its rivals. But fans adored it because it dared to be different. Its scream could be heard across the track, drowning out all other engines. People didn't come to see if it would win. They came to feel the spectacle of its speed, the howl of its supercharger, and the drama that seemed to always follow it. Today, the surviving Novis sit in museums, preserved as relics of an era when innovation often meant taking terrifying risks. For all its failures, the Novi's legend has endured because it represented something pure, ambition without compromise. It was too powerful for its time, too wild for the technology of its day, and too bold to ever be forgotten. Some even whisper of lost blueprints from the late 1960s, hinting at a twin-turbo Novi design capable of over 1,000 horsepower, a project that never saw the light of day. Whether that engine could have finally conquered Indianapolis is a mystery. What is certain, however, is that the Novi remains one of the most fascinating what-if stories in racing history. It was never a champion, but it was unforgettable.